The Grasp surfskate truck from South Korea is one of the newest additions to the market. Like the Carver CX, it's a reverse kingpin bushing-based design. Mechanically, it functions exactly like the Carver CX, but it does have some key differences that set it apart. So in this review, I'll do my best to give you everything you need to know to decide if a Grasp surfskate is for you. Let me start by giving you my bottom line up front. The Grasp feels very similar to the Carver CX. It does have some mechanical differences that give it a little bit wider range of motion and slightly change the feel. However, the feel of both the Carver CX and the Grasp are entirely dependent on the bushings you use. So because of that, the mechanical differences are hard to detect, and they're so slight that I don't find a clear advantage either way. When you compare the exact same bushings on each truck, they feel almost identical. And because both of them are easily customizable by bushings, I can't say which one is better. It really just comes down to the bushings you use and your personal preference. The Grasp does have one clear advantage over the CX. That is that the kingpin nut sits below the hanger. This enables coping grinds without hitting the kingpin nut. So if you ride bowls and you do coping grinds, then in that case, I would recommend the Grasp over the CX. But aside from that, for me, it really just comes down to availability and price. Both systems give you fantastic surfskate performance, and you can't go wrong with either. They both give you a minimalistic system that is easy to maintain and customize. Using bushings, you can make them feel virtually identical, and you can customize each of them any way you'd like. So let me break this truck down for you and show you how it compares to the CX. And for this comparison, I'm using the new and updated version of the CX, which has hollow kingpin and axles. So what Grasp has done is change the angle of the pivot rotation. So you can see here how the Carver CX sits at a little bit more of an angle like this, and the Grasp sits a little bit more of an angle like this. And mechanically, this does enable a wider range of motion and a deeper lean, which I'll show you. And it's easy to visualize the differences if I just remove the bushings from each truck. Let me show you. Okay, so with the bushings removed, it's easy to visualize the difference here in the range of motion. You can see visually how that Grasp does mechanically enable a wider range of motion and a deeper lean than the CX. However, this demonstration is totally misleading because, as I said, both are entirely dependent on bushings. So what ends up happening is when you put bushings in, you don't actually even access this increased range of motion on the Grasp with normal pumping, and I'm going to demonstrate that for you. In fact, I would say that with normal pumping, the Grasp truck actually feels like it has less lean than the CX. And the reason for that is because, again, when you look at this angle, you can see how the Carver CX is going to angle more like this, whereas if you have this Grasp, if you change that angle up like this, well, now that rotation is more on a flat plane. And the only way that you'd be able to access this wider range of motion is if you're doing a very deep, tight carve, which you can't actually do. And again, I'm going to demonstrate that. So what I feel on the Grasp is that it has a little bit of a flatter pump to it and less lean with normal pumping. So you can just visually see what they've done with the Grasp. What they've done is they've taken the CX and then you lift the angle a little bit like this, and you can see how that changes the angle. It also lifts the hanger up a little bit, and then you can see that they've added some material to the front. And what they've accomplished with this is that the Carver CX has an issue in that the kingpin nut sits above the hanger. So if you do coping grinds, you will shear that nut off. Whereas the Grasp has this hanger higher now, so you can't grind your kingpin on coping grinds with the Grasp. So that is one clear advantage of the Grasp over the CX. And let me put these bushings back in to show you something else about that. So another effect of them lifting that hanger and changing the angle is that it also makes the Grasp about 1/2 centimeter higher than the Carver CX, as you can see here. Now remember that a surfskate is a lot more than just a front truck. It's a front truck that interacts with a rear truck. So visually you can see here that the base plate on the Grasp here is lower than that CX. and the hanger is also higher. So they've got this kingpin recessed deep into here, which again enables coping grinds without any risk of hitting your kingpin nut. You can also see on both the Grasp front and rear that they've added some extra material for aesthetics, and this also makes the Grasp truck slightly heavier than the CX. A full Grasp truck set weighs about 4 ounces more than a full CX truck set. Another thing to note about the Grasp is that it actually offsets your wheelbase by 1/4 inch compared to the CX and 3/4 of an inch compared to the Carver C7. And you can visually see this by comparing decks with the same wheelbase with each truck on them. So you can see how that Grasp hangs back just a little bit further than that CX. So the obvious big question is, how does the Grasp compare to the Carver CX in terms of feel and performance? So as I said, it's very difficult to compare the feel between them. The reason being, again, because they both are entirely dependent on the bushings that you use. So in addition to the mechanical changes, Grasp also comes with 2 sets of bushings. One is just a standard set that's pretty much the exact same as Carver CX bushings. The other has hollowed out bushings in the front truck. So you can see how these are the rear. These are the rear truck, and you can see how they're just normal bushings, but these are for the front, and you can see how on the top, that's the same circumference there as your kingpin, but you look inside, and the insides of these are hollowed out, which is obviously going to enable a lot more range of motion. So when you're using these bushings on the front truck of the Grasp, it does give it a wider range of motion and a looser feel. But it's not really fair to call this an advantage of the Grasp. Reason being is because you can do this exact same thing with your Carver CX bushings. So I don't look at this as a reason to buy a Grasp. I look at this as a case for buying a Dremel tool to hollow out your bushings and experiment with this. So I think this is great. It's a great little hack, but again, it's not like any kind of mechanical advantage, and anybody can do this with any bushing for any truck. So again, if you are comparing this bushing on a Grasp truck to regular stock bushings on a Carver CX, then the Grasp is going to feel looser and have a wider range of motion. But this is totally deceiving because it's just a bushing. So if you really want to compare Carver CX versus Grasp, what you have to do is compare identical bushings. So here's what I did to compare the Carver CX versus the Grasp. I had 2 sets of identical decks, Solbortis and Avion Bellaras, and I set each of them up, one with the Carver CX and one with the Grasp. So each set is completely identical except for the trucks. So this meant that I didn't have any time between testing them. I was able to just switch back and forth and get that immediate feel. And I used the Solbortis for college campus cruising, and I used the Avion Bellaras for bull riding. And for each setup, I tested a bunch of bushings side by side. And these include the standard Grasp bushings that don't have the hollowed out center, the Grasp bushings that do have the hollowed out center on the front ones, stock Carver CX bushings, Riptide bushings in 98 aerometer, and Riptide bushings in 87.5 aerometer. And in every case, here's what I discovered when comparing the Grasp versus the CX. When you compare the exact same bushings, they feel nearly identical. And the Grasp is deceiving because mechanically, as you have seen, yes, it does enable wider range of motion and deeper lean. But as I've said, with normal pumping, you don't actually access that wider range of motion and deeper lean, so it's kind of irrelevant. You only access the widest range of motion on both trucks on the tightest of turns. And you can't really do that at normal speed, which I'm going to demonstrate for you. And even then, the differences aren't super noticeable. So let me try to demonstrate what I mean here. First of all, let me just show you the lean on this. When I stand on these, let me show you the extreme edges of each turn. So if I lean on a Carver CX, that's the deepest that it can go right there. And that's just me standing on it without me moving, okay? So you can visually see the CX. And now here's the Grasp. And so, yes, visually you can see that we do have a wider range of motion and a deeper lean on the Grasp. However, with normal pumping, you're only accessing about this much. So like I say, it's misleading. So when I'm just pumping this normally, you are not getting that range of motion. It's only when you go into very deep carves that you're actually getting that range of motion. And you have to be going very slow to do that. You're not doing that at speed. So when I'm just at that normal speed, I can't even access that because my truck's going to jackknife. So you can see how if I'm just doing normal turns here, that is not going to the deepest range that it can go. So when you're just normally pumping, you're only accessing about this range of motion, which is, again, exactly the same as the CX. So you can see how you get that typical range of motion, and then there's a certain point where it's like a sharp drop right there. Boom. So in that regard, it's like the Swelltech, where you can say, yeah, the Swelltech has more range of motion than any other Surfskate truck, but it's irrelevant because you don't actually access that range of motion. So it's the same principle with the Grasp. Does it mechanically, technically give you more range of motion and deeper lean than the Carver CX? Yes, it does. But does it matter? No, it does not. With normal pumping, the Carver CX feels like it has a little bit of a deeper, smoother lean, and the Grasp feels a little bit more of like a flatter pump. And I'm not saying one way is better than the other, that's just personal preference. I'm just trying to describe what I feel from them. Here's another way to visualize this. Here you can see the rail-to-rail lean on the Grasp with normal pumping. And here's the Carver CX. And as you can see, it's hard to tell any difference at all. And I don't feel much of a difference either. Here's the Grasp in some tight carves. And here's the CX. And again, they look and feel pretty much the same. Now here's the Grasp in a long, tight turn. At a normal speed, you're not accessing the full range of motion. It's only when you slow down right about here that it will drop into that deeper range. And you can only hit the limits when you're going extremely slow, and it usually just jackknifes you, which is what happens here. On the Carver CX, you don't have that wider range of motion. But as I've demonstrated, it doesn't matter because you don't access that widest range of motion on the Grasp. And you don't have the possibility of jackknifing on the CX. So overall, I personally prefer the flow of the CX over the Grasp, but that could be just personal preference and the fact that I'm just so used to a Carver CX. And the differences are so minor that I really can't say which one is better. It's really going to just come down to personal preference. As I've said, the one clear advantage that the Grasp has over the CX is that it enables those coping grinds without hitting your kingpin nut. You can flip your kingpin on your Carver CX to avoid this issue, but that's a bit of a pain and then you can't adjust after you do that. So if you want to customize your Grasp bushings, as I said, they are nearly identical to Carver CX bushings. So your board side bushings on both the Carver CX and the Grasp are 0.65. The roadside bushings on Carver CX are 0.56, and these roadside bushings on Grasp are 0.58. So the Grasp roadside bushings are just slightly taller than the CX bushings, but they totally work and they're interchangeable. As long as your board side bushing is the same, it's going to maintain your truck geometry, so that roadside bushing is just fine. And in terms of hardness, Grasp bushings are 90 durometer and Carver CX bushings stock are 89 durometer. So if you want to customize, you can use Carver CX bushings for both CX and Grasp. This would be, the yellow 90As would be the closest to your Grasp stock bushings. But if you want to go a little bit softer, and I recommend that you do, you might want to try the 87.5A or the 85A. And to give you a frame of reference on these, I would say that these hollowed out Grasp bushings feel like Riptide bushings in 87.5A durometer. Another important point to make about the Grasp is that I've discovered that it does not work well on wide wheelbases. I've experimented with both the CX and the Grasp on some of my longboard decks that are over 50 inches long, and the CX still works great on those longboards, but the Grasp does not work at all. So I would say that as a general principle with the Grasp, the wider your wheelbase, the worse it functions and feels. So on my scale of the best Surfskate trucks, I categorize both the Grasp and the Carver CX as street cruisers. This means that compared to pure surf trainers, they're tighter and snappier, They generate more forward momentum, so they're better for longer distances, and this makes them more versatile than pure surf trainers. But this categorization is a little bit misleading because you can customize both of these with bushings to make them feel a lot looser and more flowy. So just because I categorize them as street cruisers doesn't mean that you can't use them for pure surf training. In fact, I know a lot of surfers who swear by the CX as the best surf trainer. So we've just been talking about the truck so far, but Grasp does offer complete models, and I do have 2 Grasp decks, but unfortunately my team riders have them, so I didn't have them for this review. But Grasp decks are built very well. They're actually built with 3 layers of fiberglass in them, and then the front and rear rockers are reinforced with 4 extra fiberglass pieces. So this makes them very strong and very durable. I think a Grasp deck will last you forever. However, it also makes them a little bit heavier and stiffer. But I really like their shape and size and concave. They offer really fantastic foot placement. So here's my bottom line conclusion on the Grasp. The Grasp offers a great customizable surf skate experience with a few minor differences compared to the Carver CX. The mechanical differences are subtle and they don't really translate when you're comparing equal bushings to equal bushings. If you're a bull rider who does coping grinds, then you're probably going to appreciate the Grasp over the CX. But when it comes to feel and performance, these are entirely dependent on the bushings that you use. And when you're comparing equal bushings, they feel nearly identical. So if you already own a Carver CX, then the Grasp is not going to be a game changer for you. If you really want to customize, then just play with the bushings instead is what I would recommend. And so as I said, for me, it really is just going to come down to availability and price. So if you live in the US, at the time of making this review, you can get a full set of Grasp trucks for $149, whereas this new Carver CX set is going to cost you just $108. And a complete Grasp model will cost you $329 compared to a Carver CX model that runs between $224 and $243. So when you're comparing that difference in price, for me, I just don't find enough of an advantage of the Grasp over CX to justify that increase in price. But again, if you're talking equal prices, then I think you're going to want to definitely compare both because you may prefer the Grasp over the CX. So ultimately, whether or not the Grasp can compete with the CX, I think is really going to just come down to scale and distribution. And I hope Grasp gets that because Grasp is a great addition to the market. They're a great competitor to the CX. But no matter which one you choose, you'll be getting a great surf skate that's very easy to maintain, very easy to upgrade and customize, that will last you forever, and that will do anything that you want on a surf skate.
There's 3 things I really like about the Grasp truck. 1, I don't have to flip the kingpin in order to create grind clearance on the front truck. 2, it's a bushing-based system, which makes it lighter and less maintenance than spring-based systems like the Yamaraki and Carver C7. And the 3rd thing I like about it is that as a bushing-based system, similar to Carver CX, it does have a very different ride feel, and it's one that I find to be very enjoyable. So it creates a different ride experience from a Carver CX if that's something you're accustomed to. There's 2 things I don't care for about the Grasp. 1, it's heavy for a bushing-based system, so it's just a heavier truck. And then the other thing I don't like about it is that I find I have to pump a lot more frequently when I'm cruising around on flat land or around the neighborhood in order to maintain speed when compared to the Carver CX. On Carver CX, I tend to generate more speed with each individual pump, and so it's just a much more enjoyable feel. I'm not having to pump super frequently, whereas the Grasp, I don't get a lot of speed out of each pump. So in order to maintain speed, I'm just pumping very, very frequently. I do have the Grasp in my quiver, and what I enjoy doing with it is driving to a skate park or driving to ditch spots and cruising those kinds of places. Again, I don't really like commuting on it on flat ground through neighborhoods or on my bike path. So the main differences in the feel between the Grasp and the Carver CX are that the Grasp feels more lively and light when pumping. It has a quicker, more responsive turn than the Carver CX does. On the other hand, Carver CX tends to generate more speed with each individual pump. So my preference overall between the Grasp and Carver CX would be the Carver CX because I find the Carver CX to be more versatile. I enjoy riding my Carver CX through neighborhoods, through skate parks, ditches, and the river path, whereas I find the Grasp for me has a more limited application because I mostly prefer to just drive it to a skate park or a ditch spot and then ride it there, but I don't particularly enjoy riding the Grasp on my bike path or through neighborhoods. Which answers the next question, Grasp versus Carver CX. I prefer riding the Carver CX on flat ground because most of my flat ground skating is commuting. And I just find the Carver CX to be the superior commuter because it does generate more speed per pump. When it comes to the Grasp versus Carver CX for bull riding, I tend to enjoy both of them. Whenever I'm just rolling and carving, I sometimes enjoy the Grasp a little bit more because it tends to be a little bit more lively. But whenever I want to do more tricks, the Carver CX is my preference because it's lighter weight and a little bit more stable feeling. I do not surf, so I cannot speak to which one is a better surf trainer when it comes to the Grasp or the Carver CX. And whenever it comes to advantages of the Grasp over the Carver CX, for me personally, the only real advantage is the fact that you don't have to flip the kingpin in order to create grind clearance. That just reduces maintenance and hassle for swapping bushings and cleaning bushings, things like that. My overall impression of the Grasp deck is I think that the shape is fantastic. I really enjoy the tail width. I enjoy the board shape. I think the concave is a really nice feel. It has some nose on it and enough upturn on that nose to catch your foot when doing ollie-based tricks. And I really like the laser cut grip tape. It makes it pretty unique. I think it's a really cool deck. The only thing I dislike about this deck is it's really heavy. Of my surf skate decks, this is the heaviest deck that I own. I weighed it at 4.25 pounds. My other main surf skate that I ride is my Crooked Evil Bird, which actually has more surface area than the Grasp does, and it's a wider deck, and my Crooked deck only weighs 3.43 pounds. So that's more than 3/4 of a pound heavier for my Crooked deck. And I looked online and I saw that Grasp infuses a lot of different layers into their deck, which I think just adds a lot of extra weight because, again, this deck is the heaviest one that I own. And because it's so heavy, that's the reason I basically don't even ride it anymore.
Hi, this is Ace, and today the surf skate that we're reviewing is the Grasp. So one of the things that I really like about the Grasp is the quality of the trucks. The trucks seem to be really high quality, really well made, very robust, very strong, and look like they can take on just about anything. I think the Grasp does a pretty fair job of replicating surfing. Out of the box in the stock setup, you're able to put the Grasp onto rail. You're able to lean it pretty easy, and that's what you want. Unfortunately, we didn't have the stock wheels, so I put on the Surfskate Love 78A wheels. These are really grippy wheels, and they gave the hold, the grip that I really wanted on the asphalt so that I can practice deep carves. I'd categorize the Grasp as more of a hybrid style surf skate. So the Grasp isn't as loose as some of the other top surf trainers like the Spice Skate Octo Surf or the Smooth Star Thruster D. So that's the thing with the Grasp, is that because it's a bushing based system, depending on how you set it up with the bushings that you use and also with the wheels that you use, you could set it up more for the skate park or for the street or for practicing surf training. But out of the box, it does a pretty fair job of doing it all. Grasp versus the Carver CX, what are the differences that I feel between them? The difference is, again, out of the box in the stock setup, the Grasp turns tighter, it leans easier, and you're able to carve deeper. You can achieve that same feel with the Carver CX by changing the bushings, but then again, you'd have to change how it comes stock, I think. So Grasp versus the Carver CX, which one do I prefer and why is that? I'd have to go with the Carver CX still because it's just something that I'm more familiar with. It's a feel that I know well. You know, I think also there's a regional availability thing. The Grasp comes out of South Korea and it has a lot of fanfare there. It has a lot of popularity there. In the continental United States in general, I think the Carver CX is a lot easier to get a hold of. And because of that availability, and also the brand recognition, you know, we have to say there's something to that because Carver is the original surf skate. They created the whole category, you know, they're available everywhere. And because of that, you're able to get parts for the Carver CX a lot easier. So the things that I didn't like about the Grasp, I didn't really care for this particular board. You know, the feel underneath the foot, it wasn't as nice as the Carver Black Tip that I have that I was comparing it against, and I like that better. I'm sure Grasp has other boards, other decks, and you know, you could choose between them. So another thing that I didn't really like about the Grasp is that although on the outside the truck looks very different, it is essentially a CX truck. As far as that, I'd rather see more innovation in the area of surf skates. So if we're looking at it from the perspective of using it as a surf trainer, which one is more the pure surf trainer, I'd go with the Grasp. And again, that's because it is able to be put on rail easier. It leans easy. That's going to be also affected by the rider weight and the bushings. So the rider weight's going to affect how much pressure it takes to lean on it. I'm a pretty light guy, so the stock bushing worked well for me. But for someone who is, even lighter, you're going to have to change it. For someone who's heavier, you're going to have to change it. Again, it's a bushing-based system, and that's the thing that's going to be important with these CX style trucks.
Hi, my name is Laura, and I'm reviewing the Grasp truck. What I like most about the Grasp truck is the simple design and the ability to adjust to a more stiff hybrid feeling truck for tricks, stalls, rock to fakies where you need more board control, or looser for pumping on flat ground, completing slides, and for increased range of motion for turns and bowls and the pump track. The Grasp is a stiffer ride than you would typically think of when you hear surf skate. I would say it's overall less surfy board, not a great choice if you're looking for a surf trainer. One thing in particular on the Grasp truck that I struggled with is a small raised portion on the back truck where the cutout for the kingpin sits. This made it more difficult for me to slide my truck on the coping when completing coping stalls if my back wheel was not tight and hugging the coping when I turned onto the coping. So overall, it made it more challenging for me to know where my truck was on the coping just by feel. Carve grinds were not an issue because the kingpins are set down into the truck out of the way. The deck in particular felt very heavy to me, which also made it more difficult to complete maneuvers when trying to manipulate the coping. If I had the Grasp in my quiver, it would definitely be a truck I would gravitate to frequently due to its versatility and adjustability to perform bull riding, pump track, or just cruising around streets and sidewalks. When comparing the Grasp to the Carver CX truck, I feel the CX is more surfy when loosened than a loose Grasp truck. The kingpin is more exposed on the CX, making it more difficult when completing tricks and grinds on pool coping where it can snag. And the Grasp truck, the kingpin is set down into the truck and is out of the way for grinds. The front truck's a bit smoother than the back truck with that raised metal part, but I'm sure it would easily be worn down flat with a few more grinds. Then you wouldn't even notice the raised portion. It's a very minor detail. I don't think I can choose between the Grasp and the CX truck because I feel they have different purposes. If I want more surfy feel and pumping ability, I would choose the CX. If I want a versatile hybrid type of surf skate for bowls, tricks, and the pump track, then the Grasp would be my choice. I prefer the CX truck for flatland skating because it's more pumpable. I prefer the Grasp truck for bowl, park riding. An advantage of the Grasp over the CX would be there's more versatility across settings. Flat ground, pump track, bull riding, coping tricks, and it's a good hybrid truck. When looking at the deck, my overall impression is it's heavy but good quality. The deck has fiberglass, carbon fiber, and bamboo embedded in it, so very unique. I like that the concave shape hugs my feet well. And it's wide and stable, especially at high speeds. I like that there is a rocker in the nose and the tail, which allows opportunity for a wider variety of tricks. The biggest downside of this deck is that it's heavier than any other deck I have had, and it's a pain to carry and difficult to maneuver. When comparing the Grasp to the Carver deck, the Grasp deck feels higher quality, seems very indestructible compared to the Carver decks. This deck also held up much better when completing board slides than the plain wood of the Carver deck. Because the Carver deck is lighter, I do feel I have more control of that board.